The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. We're just going to welcome to our Advanced Practitioner webinar. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes to let people log on, and we'll begin shortly. All right, why don't we get started? Good morning and afternoon for those on the East Coast. Thanks for joining our AP webinar today. Hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. My name is Steve Day with StrataCom, and presenting today is Tony Modis, a senior consultant with StrataCom. Tony will be discussing the Cherwell System Analyzer, its usage and optimization. For those not familiar with StrataCom, we've been a premier Cherwell partner for about 9 years now and have focused on IT service management since 1997. We do implementations and phase 2 projects, performance tuning and health checks, integrations and upgrades, basically anything Cherwell related. We've built a few maps also for Cherwell, and they're available in the map exchange. Most recently, we've developed a mobile client for Cherwell and also created a Kanban boards tool that integrates to Cherwell as well. If anyone's interested, just let us know if you want more information on those tools. Since everyone's in listen-only mode, use chat to ask questions, and I'll try to make sure that Tony gets those questions answered. I will be recording this webinar, and we'll be sure to email everyone the recording link in a few days following the webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony. Tony?
All right. Thanks, Steve. Good morning and afternoon, everybody. As Steve said, my name is Tony Modis, and I've been working with StrataCom and Cherwell for as long as, well, I've been working with Cherwell as long as StrataCom has, so, and a bit longer with StrataCom. So hopefully we'll get some good information out to you today. So today we're going to talk about the Cherwell System Analyzer. The way that I want to kind of go about the logistics of this meeting is I'm going to go over some very basic interface and usage information. And following that, we're going to go into some other troubleshooting and a performance analysis live demos. And I would like to hold any of the questions until the end of the initial get everybody on the same page. And then I would say, go ahead and have at it, and let's make the performance in the troubleshooting section as relevant to everybody on the call as possible. I don't want to go over things that you already know, and I want to make sure that this is of value. So as I said, we'll start with the interface, go over some basic usage, our troubleshooting, performance analysis, and then our questions. All right. To note, this has been built off of a 10.02 system. There haven't been any recent changes from previous versions, so this should be pretty applicable back to, gosh, from my experience, there might have been minor details or bug fixes, but it's been pretty consistent through since the analyzer was introduced. Obviously, the amount of messages and the types of messages have expanded as the tool has expanded. So, but the interface itself has been pretty static. All right. So our first place is the start and stop of the displaying of the messages. This is the collection of those messages. And it's pretty straightforward. Next one that we see there that's grayed out in this particular screenshot is the run until the next breakpoint. So this will obviously collect and display the messages until the next breakpoint that you have specified. And of course, we'll go over breakpoints. Number 3 is waiting on the next message. This is actually a way for you to pause in the middle of processing and move back and forward. It doesn't necessarily drop you down to the, or it doesn't necessarily prevent the focus from being dropped down to the bottom where the newest messages are being displayed. So if you're done collecting the information, I typically recommend that you use the start stop. I'm sure a lot of people are already aware of that, but just for those of you who aren't, that's a quick tip so that when you're looking at details, you're not getting stuck going back up and getting dragged down to the bottom. Next up, so step to the next message. So that's when when we've hit a breakpoint and we're going along, and you just want to go step by step to see exactly what's happening through the process. Number 5 is displaying which messages should be displayed. So this is basically what information is being collected. This is how you can refine down what's being shown to you so that you can not have to wade through as much clutter to get the information that you need to do what you're trying to do. Number 6 is set the options for the analyzer. The options are pretty much just the latency, and we'll go into that. Number 7 is being able to set the breakpoints. Those are based on the types of messages that are displayed in option 5. And if you don't have the message displayed in option 5, then you won't stop on those. There won't be a breakpoint. And so just keep that in mind, that any of the breakpoints that you want active should also be displayed. Number 8 is our show values of the current field. I'm sure almost everybody's familiar with this one. This one gets used quite a bit. 9 is just exporting to a file. It's CSV. That way you can pull it into other tools. You can pull it into Excel or anything else and do some more advanced analysis of it. And then number 10 is to just clear the displayed messages, and that's pretty straightforward. All right, so we'll go in a little deeper on the ones that aren't straightforward and that have additional options. So the messages to display. So this is kind of what are these things? Like why are they relevant? Why should I be using these at different times? So our adaptive layout, that is pretty self-explanatory. It's going to tell you the size of the screen, of the window that you have, and it's going to tell you what adaptive layout, whether it's the mobile or the tablet or the base layout or any of the custom ones that you've set out. And this can give you a way of understanding how the different layouts are going to be used, because Cherwell uses the device independent pixels, which have a little bit of a ratio, and so this can kind of give you a more real-world feel about how things are going to happen on different devices, or at least on different computers and different resolution screens. App service calls, these are calls between the application server and the client. There's some timings in there. There's definition messages that you can see about how when on startup, you will see that it's updating a definition or it's bringing in some cache definition type things. And that can show you that when you publish a blueprint, that when you go and you push that change out on your live system, you'll be able to see, oh, these things are going to happen, so everybody's going to take this kind of startup performance hit. And that's just dependent upon, you know, setting expectations and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes it's just kind of more, ooh, this is kind of neat to know, than it is actual practical. Business object, that's going to give you information about changes to your fields, possible, and actions and things like that. Of course, the actions that call one steps will then fall under the one step that we'll get to down here. But so there is a little bit of overlap in some of these. Well, I don't know, overlap's not the right word, but kind of a pass off, right? So business object loading time, that's for the business objects that are in focus and any of the relationships that get loaded. Straightforward. Your errors, any error messages, we're all familiar with the null error messages. Any foreign key information that's when it's being used, what foreign keys are being used, and the data in those fields that are being used, so that you can troubleshoot things and see what's going on there. There's also a foreign key potential issue where it will not find legal values, or it won't find IDs, and it can kind of give you a sense of where the issue might lie. Also, when it references the rec ID in the potential ID or in the potential issues, make sure that you realize that that's not the rec ID that you may have created in association with those. That is the Cherwell's foreign key ID, which gets stored in the VID or whatever, VDX, or I can't remember what that is. It's an underscore, it's in the database, and it's not exposed to the tool. So if you haven't dived into the database, you wouldn't necessarily see that. But just be aware that, you know, don't go trying to find that rec ID, because you won't find it unless you look in the database. Modified values, so these are just those modifiers on the tokens and expressions and other places in the tool. So that can show you, like, a lot of them are ellipses, the hashes, all those types of things can show you what it's actually doing at that time and when it's doing them. One step, so this is when the one step starts, when it ends, all the sub steps, the calls to other one steps, emails. This is probably my most used one, because I'm constantly troubleshooting or looking at performance for one steps. Other, this is great. This is things like business hours. It actually shows the details of the system analyzer, so it's kind of meta in that regard. There's third-party chat information is out there, like your BOMGARs, and obviously this list is not exhaustive. I was just kind of going through what I knew and what I'd experienced. You may experience other things if you've got more complex or differing systems than what I have. Query. Now this one is interesting, because this gives you the query scripts that are being run, the values that are being passed to those scripts, and the timings of those. Now it's tier 2 only, which means that you have to connect via a database connection to get this information, and that kind of puts a kibosh on that for SaaS customers, unless I'm not familiar with something that Cherwell has offered on that front. But just keep that in mind. And it can also be extremely useful when you're looking at performance, when you're doing health checks and looking at the indexes and wanting to know, does this index, yeah, it told me that it's going to increase performance, but the way that you build the index, what fields you put in first and second and all that sort of stuff makes a difference. So this can be very useful in that. And I think that we have, well, I know we have a presentation on performance tuning from a database perspective. So I'm sure that if you're interested in kind of combining this, then that would be something that we could get information over to you about. Session, I have to admit, I can't find any information. I never run across this showing up. So if anybody has any knowledge about this particular one, my brain goes to, you know, sessions in the portal and things like that, but obviously the system analyzer is not available there. So table validations, these are things like data cache lookups, validation table lookups coming from the database. It shows, and it can show possible ties and performance issues. So for instance, if you're seeing validations where you wouldn't expect validations, you can go back and look at your system and see if it's making a call where you weren't expecting it. All right, table validation timing. So that's basically just the timing of those requests. So if you're interested strictly in performance and not so much in or gaining an understanding of how long certain things are taking, then you can use that one separate of the table validation. Token expression error. These are things where you've got data mismatch, like improper data types. You'll see it if you try and perform a calculation on text fields, things like that. I think that there used to be a kind of I wouldn't call it a bug, but there was a token expression error that was out there about the number of approvals. You might have seen that if you were in previous versions. And then web service calls. And the web service calls are about calling to outside web services, because obviously when you're calling in, you're going into your IIS or side of things, and so you would log it from that. So when you're making calls out for your integrations, you can use those to perform performance as well as troubleshooting. There's the convenient little options down here for select all and select none. I will say that the select none works as expected. The select all leaves off other query and app service calls, because those are kind of special and not frequently used, I guess. All right, so now we're on to the options. So the analyzer options will bring this up. You can add network latency. So this allows for local admins that are next to their servers to be able to understand how their systems are going to work for global rollouts. You typically recommend that you use a tool like a tracing tool, ping, to understand what the real world latency is, and then mimic that here. The latency does get displayed in the analyzer window so that you can see, and then you also, it's only enabled when the system analyzer window is open. So if you close the analyzer window, the latency is no longer applied. But then when you start up the analyzer again, the setting is retained, so it will start that latency up. And this can be useful for lots of performance things. It's really getting into the nitty-gritty though. So I don't use this super frequently, but it's nice that it's there for those times when I do have those issues. All right, we'll get into the breakpoints now. So when I add a breakpoint, it's going to give me a setting here for category and for look for. So the categories are basically any of those things that we reviewed earlier. You can see that here, adaptive layout. So you can specify, okay, I want to see queries where configuration item is being pulled back, or I want to see foreign key for my status field, things like that. Otherwise, you can do any, and that's obviously pretty broad. And the look for is just any text, and it gives you this little thing down here. It says ID or name or whatever. So you can put dates, you can put anything basically that's going to be in that message, and that will bring those things back. I usually recommend that when you're starting on, say, like a troubleshooting or a performance issue and you're using breakpoints, that you start more generally so that you can understand the flow of it, and then you can specify exactly, get a little more specific in what you want to see. All right. So you can remove, can edit and remove these. The options down here in the bottom to select all, or I should say enable or disable all, these are useful. They can shut off all your breakpoints or turn on all your breakpoints. You can kind of do it that way. And if you are in a pause mode on your system analyzer, you can actually come in here, turn on and off breakpoints, and then proceed to the next breakpoint. So if you realize that something that you thought previously I needed to stop at, you don't need to anymore, you can come in here, unselect it, and move to the next breakpoint, and it will ignore that one. So that's a nice to have. One important thing to note is any breakpoint, and I think I said this before, but again, it's important to know, any breakpoints in here, if you want them to stop, they have to be part of the messages that are displayed. So, all right. Current values, this is basically, I mean, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this. The one thing that I don't see frequently is the search bar used. I find that extremely useful, especially on business objects that have a large number of fields. I like to just put it, like if I'm looking for IDs or rec IDs, I just put in rec ID and it brings back all my IDs in a screen, that I can see without having to scroll. So that's super useful. The little eye icon hides and shows values that are null, or if it's a logical false, so that can kind of reduce the list as well, so that you're not scrolling and looking for things. The folder icon, that's just whether or not things are put in their folders that are specified on those advanced settings for those fields. I usually take that off when I'm using the search, just because I want to see everything in a single go. And then the final icon on that far right is the load relationships. And this is useful because not all relationships are loaded at the same time as the business object. Obviously, if you have a relationship that has the load immediately option checked, it will show up here. So you can see that with this particular incident, I had these things were either load immediately on the checkbox, or they had some piece of information that needed to be displayed on the incident at the time of load. Like customer is probably one of those where it's saying, oh, I've got a relationship here and I need to display some phone numbers and some email addresses. And so I load that relationship and then I display that information. So if you don't see any of the relationships there, you click on that, it loads everything that it hasn't had a chance to or had a need to pull in. And that's useful also for performance. It kind of gives you a quick look without having to dig through the analysis, the messages from the analyzer, to say, okay, am I loading 15 relationships? Do I need to load 15 relationships? Can I do something differently to offload that information if it's necessary, or et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, export to a file, pretty straightforward. Browse your files, select the columns. They're already usually all selected, so away you go. All right, basic usage. So messages are shown with a fixed set of data, like those are the columns: timestamp, category, type, name. The category, type, and name are the categories, the messages that be displayed. Type is kind of a subcategory, so to speak, that gives you a little bit of information. It actually corresponds to some of the trebuchet table information. So you see business object def and query def, and where it's, what it's doing with that information, where that information is coming from. And then the name is typically like the field. It can be a business object, it can be a form name, it can be a modifier type. So that name field changes dependent upon the category and type. All right, timestamps obviously give you an order and timing of process. So you can kind of see, okay, did this action first and this action second. And if I look at this table validation, if I look at this table validation, it took, no time. If I look at this, this query, it took a couple, 10 milliseconds. And then the information is also inside. So when we talk about going inside, we double click on our message and we can see the information that's available to us. One nice thing that's available in here is you do have the option to do a find. So if you hit Control F after you've double clicked in here, you get the find icon up at the top, or the find field up at the top, and then you also can have regular expression finds, whole word finds, and case sensitive. And then you can use, you have some navigation over there on the right, as well as the close out the find. So that can be useful for rather than taking it, copying it, and pasting it into another thing. Obviously, that's an option if you have more complex needs, or you want to use the query as a part of your performance process and you're running it directly against the database. So you can copy that whole query. And down at the bottom, I apologize, I wasn't really thinking about the screenshot when I took it, but down at the bottom, there are the values for that query, and I'll show that in the live demo. So, all right. So that's pretty much it from the basic performance and the interface. So are there any questions on that?
I don't show any questions in chat, Tony.
Okay. So let's get into the live demo, and I'm happy to, like I said, I'm happy to field questions on this that you may have encountered. Real world examples are always better than contrived ones, but I will do my best to go through here. So jump in with any questions that you have as I go through this, and we'll start with the troubleshooting. So I've already started up my Cherwell 1002 here. I've gone to help, I've selected my system analyzer, and here it is, right? So I'm gonna clear those messages. It's stopped, so it's not collecting things right now. We've gone over a number of the places where the system analyzer can be used to troubleshoot things, and so we'll just kind of coalesce that all into something now that makes a more cohesive usage of it. So one of the places that I frequently use this process for troubleshooting is one steps. So I'm going to go ahead and also keep in mind that when you're, and I'm sure that most people who use the analyzer are aware that it takes a lot of, I should say, time or whatever to display the values in the system analyzer. So I typically don't leave the analyzer running unless I'm ready to collect that information, and that just keeps things from taking forever. I had a client the other day I was talking to on the phone. We were doing some troubleshooting, and he had left the analyzer up while we were trying to do some things, and he was like, wow, why is this going so slow? Do we have another problem now? And then I said, well, your analyzer is running back there. We shut it off, and it was very fast after that. So keep that in mind. All right, let me pull this record up here. Maybe I should be running the analyzer to see why this is going so slow. All right, here we go. All right, so let's say that I'm out here. I've got some sort of process I'm going through. I could look at any of these various things, unlink from a major incident, submit to knowledge base, those types of things, time tracking. I like to pick on the status because it's pretty easy. I come up here, hit play, and actually before I do that, I need to decide what I want. So if I'm troubleshooting a one step, I'm not going to care about the adaptive layout. I'm not going to care about the app service call necessarily. I may want to care about the business object because I want to see the fields that it's changing. I may care about timing. I may not from a troubleshooting perspective. So I'm going to shut that one off. Errors are great. I'll leave the foreign key off, but leave the potential issues on. I'm not concerned about the modify value, although if I find that that's a problem, I can always come back in and turn that on and rerun the one step. One steps, I'm definitely going to leave the query on because I like that one. Table validations are great, timing, token expression, and I know that there's no web service calls. So this is typically, I'll go through and say, what am I doing and what do I need to see? And say, okay. And then I usually clear my messages, I start, and then I come in here and I take whatever action. And this is going to start collecting. I'm going to fill this out. And obviously when you're doing, well, I'll get to that in performance. So, all right. So as it's going through, like I said, it's a little slower when you've got the analyzer open. So, all right, so we've got everything here. It's continuing to go through, and once it's done, I like to hit stop so that I'm not collecting that extra information at the end. Okay, so now we can come here and see everything that that did. And one advantage of exporting this stuff is that you can put it, when you put it into another tool, you can actually group by the category or type, so that you're not, so you don't have to kind of search through it. But the nice thing about this is you know what order it's doing it in. So if we look at the name, we can tell what's happening here. We've got a one step. It's the next status from relationship. It's preparing to execute the steps. It's performing a save against that. It's finished the save, so you can see how much time it took. And then each of the sub steps. So check for required, decide between multiple cases. It made a decision about those, said, okay, I'm going to do the if command. So that's a useful place. So you can, when you're troubleshooting, you can see, okay, I'm flowing from, here's a decision step, and then the very next step is what step it is. So you know that whatever the condition that you set on that step is valid and evaluated to true. Okay, let's see. Then it's preparing to resolve the incident. So obviously it needs to, that came from another one step. So you can see that, preparing to execute steps. So we now know that we're 2 levels deep into a one step. And then it's going into its sub step here of get closed. So, and we can look into this. Not all of these have super useful information in them. A lot of times the information is just useful out here, but there are rec IDs out here. So like you can see that if you're well versed in rec IDs, you can see that this is the incident business object that we're running it against. And you could also pull out, oh, this is the record ID, or let's see, where is it? The type ID. Here's the where I'm not seeing it. Hey, maybe I'm, oh, it looks like I'm queuing in on the AE. There's multiples here. So this is our actual record ID that we've got out there. So, but yeah, and you can see that up here as well. So it shows that what it's running against. So this gives us, now we're seeing where our field def, this is our business object. And a lot of times in here, you'll see these query defs, and there will be some syncdb stuff out there. Those are things that are happening in the background. They're communications between the client and the server to keep everything flowing. And those can be ignored. They're not really part of the process. They're part of the client's existence. So as the client just sits there, it's going to constantly be communicating with the server to make sure that it knows, okay, where I'm at, and when, hey, did I check in? Did I do things? All that sort of stuff. So you can see there, you'll see when you're setting field definitions that it'll say attempting to set, and then it will say the value was set. In between those, you'll see the auto populates. After the value is set, you'll see things like calculations. So it's ways that you can see, okay, did my auto populate run? One of the things that I see on here is when you're doing like a validation against a service or category, you have constraints that are saying this service, only show me these category or these subcategories for this category for this service. And in one steps, if you set all of those in one step, in a single sub-step, you can run into a situation where those validations will basically say, hey, I don't have the information, this is not valid, you can't proceed. So that's a pretty common one that I see from a troubleshooting perspective. And being able to see the order of those being set in here can help you say, okay, do I need to break this up into multiple steps? And the inverse of that is on our performance side, and we'll talk about that next when we get to the performance. Let's see here, just checking my notes to make sure I'm getting everything. One trick that you can also use when you're doing troubleshooting of, say, automation processes that are run in the background is if it's in the global folder, then you can use it there. You might need to make a copy of that one step and put it in a folder that's accessible. But log in to the rich tool using the same login that the automation process uses, which is set up in the system in the server manager. And then you can run those in the foreground with the automation processor on, and you can do most things from there and see, okay, here's where my problems lie. Continue on here. Let's see, get closed description. So more sub-steps, field defs. You can see here that the status changed, and so now it's pulling in via the auto populates the next status and the status text and the one step, and it's pulling in all that information. Let's see, set resolve date time. That's another part of the step. And it finished executing this step, so now it's going to save. And so you can see where all the saves are. Each save is going to cost you a little bit. If you can bundle all the saves at the end, that can be useful. Let's see here. Got our pop-ups. You'll see this often when you have guard conditions or those conditions on individual substeps where it wasn't true, so it's not going to run this. So here's one loaded. Here's one that's related to performance issues or performance settings on relationships, where if you've set up the journal to only load keys, you'll see that. So it's only loading the keys and not the pages in reference to all of the data from a database perspective. So we can look at this relationship, or I mean at this query that the relationship is using. This is saying, this is the query that I can pull out and run. And these down here at the bottom, well, the at P1, at P2, at P3, those are your parameters. They're variables that SQL Server uses, and it will say. And sometimes you'll see kind of dynamic things like this, where it's stored some information in another temporary place in the database, and so that's where it's pulling it from, so that you don't have that information necessarily. Oh, there's one of those foreign key IDs that I was referencing. So the owned by, this is the hidden rec ID field that the foreign key process uses. All right, and then you'll also see, typically with a lot of these things, you'll see where you have your histories turned on. So all of those things will get created, and you'll go through all of that. So you can say, oh, I've got things out there that I don't care about. You'll also see, let's see, from a troubleshooting perspective, that's pretty, most of the time I use it as a what is the system doing and where are the values. So that I don't get too detailed in there. I can use the breakpoints for those. So let's say I wanted to see where the foreign key status was being called. I might say, okay, I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to start up my analyzer, and I'm going to refresh my incident here. And I should have a foreign key on this one. I do not. Did I set that one up right? Let's do this. Let's do any. Should follow my own rule and start more general, right? Okay, and hold on. Okay, so here we have, and also keep in mind that it does that SQL data adapter with the service stuff. It does kind of go after, so you may have to go one message earlier to see where your breakpoint actually was. So just keep that in mind and don't think, am I losing my mind? I don't see status in here. So it came up here and it said, okay, we found an SLA status. So here I can go ahead and I can go to the next message. Oh, look, surprising. It's those DB sync things. But I know, oh, there we go. So there was the next valid one. So I can look at this and say, okay, this is an SLA query, it's running against this, et cetera. And then if I want to go to the next breakpoint, then I can hit that one and it'll run until I've got the next, to the next place where status is being used. Keep running, and if I'm done with this, then like I said, I can come in here, I can take off this breakpoint, I can say run to the next breakpoint, and it will pull everything else out, so that way you can be done and collect all your information. All right, so I kind of have been sliding into performance. Performance is really where, I mean, troubleshooting is great, but it's pretty, to me, it's pretty straightforward. And in looking at this, where are my values? Did the value get set to what I expect it was? What it was? If it didn't, then I go back to the one step and I look at where things are at, and I, move things around and try different things, and then see what the information that comes out of here is. And I like to do things really methodically too. So I prefer to make very few changes and come back and run the analyzer so that I see exactly what those changes are. And then I can put those things in the back of my mind as knowledge that I now have. And then when I'm going through the analyzer in the future date, I can actually say, I don't need to, I know that this won't work or this will work in this particular situation. So I talked about the need to separate out steps in order to work with a one step that's not working appropriately. Sometimes from a performance perspective, merging those steps can be useful. I know that one of my colleagues that gave the performance had talked about each individual step was costing a bit of time and resources, and that if he merged all of those things into a single step, that it actually ran significantly faster. Now, I realize that that's not always possible, but the system analyzer can say, okay, here's a step, here's an action, here's a step, here's an action, here's a step, here's an action. And I can say, do I need all those things in separate things? Now, it may be useful from a reverse engineering where I'm looking at the one step and I can see very clearly what each one of those are. But since Cherwell has given us the annotation section, that should give us a little bit, a less labor-intensive place to put that information. Let's see here. So we can look at the timing of these things. So for instance, from the time of, let's clear this out, and let's say I want to, one of the things that sometimes people don't think about is the cost for a dashboard, right? So let's do that. Let's come out to our dashboards, and I'm gonna pull up Manager here, and let's see, dashboards, default dashboards, and I'm gonna do my work dashboard. So as this pulls up, it's going out and it's performing queries and it's doing all sorts of stuff. And you can see there in the background that it's collecting things and processing and counting and all that sort of stuff. And this will kind of give me a sense of from start to finish, or perhaps which widgets on there are taking more time than others. And then that would be based in the query data. All this goes through. All right, so we'll stop that. And so typically I'll look, and I take this, when I do timing with the system analyzer, because it takes time for the system analyzer to output this on the screen, I prefer to not use this as an absolute time that it takes, but rather a relative time that it takes. So if I start here and I say, okay, at the end of this process, it was at 44:06:41, and this was at 43. So it looks like we took about 1 minute to process that. I'm not going to say that a normal user, when they bring up that dashboard, is going to sit there for a minute. I don't think that that's accurate. You obviously could time that with an external device. That's also has its kind of subject to starting and stopping and human error and all that sort of stuff. But basically, if I go make changes to this dashboard and I rerun this query, And actually, I guess it started a little bit lower than that because I had waited, so it's more like around this time frame. So it's a little bit less than a minute. Then I can compare that against my previous values, and I can say, okay, in this particular case, I was able to reduce this by 30 seconds by removing this one widget. And then I can go out and say, okay, did this widget, is it because the widget is time intensive, or is it because I had an inefficient query? And I can come in here and I can look at those queries, I can pull them out, I can run them against the database, I can see exactly how much cost those queries were. Again, that cost in the database world can be relative as well, because it's dependent upon your servers and your memory and all that sort of stuff. And then I can put an index on that query and I can rerun it, say, oh yeah, my cost went down, and then I can come out here and rerun the dashboard and see that that's gone down. So that's kind of a, like I said, a relative way of determining things. You'll also see repeated things in here, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of this stuff, I'm not really too sure why it repeats. I haven't found it to necessarily be because I have called incident status multiple times. I think that this is related to the number of statuses and how it's actually looking at things because of drop downs and maybe like charts where it's being counted by status and stuff like that. So don't necessarily interpret this as, oh, I've done something where the status is being called 5 times. But it could be. I mean, don't get me wrong, but more often than not, it's the way that the system is looking at these things. I think I saw in here somewhere there was here it is, like a data cache. So that shows you when you're using a cache table. So I've used this one for performance to say, okay, is it more costly for me, like if I have a slow startup time, let's say I've cached a ton of tables, a ton of information, I've got to download a lot of the, I've got a big dcat file in my app data folder, right? And that may be useful that may be okay, but it may not be, because if the value in the cache takes the same amount of time, then on the startup, I'm impeding the user from starting up more quickly. So it's a balance of looking at these things, and having this data out here can be useful in understanding that. So I can say, okay, this one, the query lookup, I don't think there's additional information in here now. So I can say that between this step and this step, I mean, it was basically like super fast. So I'm not going to worry about that. And I think that having the data cache against the incident type is great, right? Because there's only 2 of them and they rarely change. So great, we'll move forward. But something where you're getting into like larger things, I don't think I have one in here. Let's see, query lookup, data cache. Yeah. So let's see, let me check my notes here. One thing also that you can use the analyzer for is for understanding searches that you run. So for instance, if you have a search, let's go to Search Manager. I'm gonna look at incident searches. I'm gonna come out, of course the dialog box won't let me. So let's clear that out. Go back in here. And I think I'm actually gonna do the quick search just for now, because I wanna, so we'll say, we can see how Cherwell builds its queries, which are important for understanding, our indexes and our own building of the systems out on how we wanna build these searches that get used throughout our system, and widgets and in reporting and all that sort of stuff. So I may want to say where the call source is equal to the phone. And let's see. Okay, let's try that again.
We do have a couple questions, Tony, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead while I'm getting this set up.
Okay, a little while ago, Skip had asked if we log in with the same account as the automation process service, Does it show the automation process queries?
It shows whatever those calls are being made from that one step. So I think I understand the question, and please, add a follow-up if I didn't. But basically, if you're running the same one steps that user would normally run, then you're running those same queries. Now, as in earlier versions, it was a serialized process where it would just go one after the other. In newer versions, they get those out of sync. So those may, that may impact what you're seeing from that end user, from that automation process user's perspective, because that automation process user may be sending this one and doing a little bit of work on that one and another one. And that's where, sometimes you run into situations where if you're using a stored value, you can actually overwrite that if you have two processes coming in at the same time. So it's not entirely a one-to-one, it's more of a troubleshooting thing of what's going on here. And aside from what I just described, where it can kind of step on its own toes, it's usually pretty good. So.
Okay. There's a question, will we ever get lucky enough to have a system analyzer type tool available to troubleshoot the email monitor effectively for hosted environments? Calling Cherwell support is not that much fun while developing and troubleshooting.
Yeah. Well, I obviously can't answer that question because I don't work for Cherwell, and I don't have insight into the direction that they think is important. But I do know that there are some logging opportunities out there, but I don't frequently use that. Yeah. That's a great question. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer.
How about this
I'll
one?
keep my fingers crossed for us all.
Yeah, there you go. Do you need direct access to the database to determine cost?
So the cost that I referenced was a usage of the SQL Studio, where you go in and actually set up the query to show the execution plan. That particular cost, yes, you need access to the database. From a cost perspective for the queries that are run, you can't select the query option with the tier 2 only, so you can't get that granular. But using the business object loading time and the table validation timing is your next best options for those if you don't have access to the database.
Okay, great. Thanks. And then the last one, Teresa may have missed this, but where do you add the breakpoints?
Yeah. So the breakpoints are this stop sign type icon here, and then you just hit add, and then you can put in any of the categories that you like along with the text. So I may want to look at business object, and I could put in the rec ID of the business object, and then I can say okay, and then I can turn them on or off by clicking on them. If I have multiples, let me add another one in here. Of course, it goes to session, which, like I said, I'm not really too sure how that's ever used. And then I can say, okay, I want one and not the other, or I can say I want none of them for now and continue on with my process. And then, of course, I can delete them. So.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Just got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so throw your questions out there if you've got any others. I'm going to quickly go over what I kind of started here before. Let's see here. So I ran a query that said, here's the call source. So you can see here, I immediately know that this call source is foreign keyed because it's using that field and it's using this rec ID. So that's what it's pulling in as off my query. So if I come back out here, clear this, and run another query, I can actually see what these are being built. So when I say it's not equal to something, and if I put in another, oops, sorry, put in another one here, maybe created by, and we'll just created by the person that, let's see, where are you? Of course, why am I not seeing what I'm looking for? Incident fields, assign, oh, there we go, assigned to. So if it's created by the assigned to, right? So we'll take a look at that. That gives us another query out here that will then show us, see, so now we've got a bunch of outer joins and some other information out here that it's using. Let's see, is this the right one? Inner join, no, it doesn't look like it. Let me take a quick look at the, there we go, that looks better. So now we can see our call source ID here and that it's created by, and we can see that it's just referencing those fields. And then we can actually take this and use it for what we need. And you can also see, you can say it's got an and there, but I could also see how it's going to build that query out by changing it and actually, let's see, let's edit the current search. So let's say I change this to an or, and I add in a group and another comparison clause in here where created date time is today. And then we can look at that one out here and we can see how this is getting created. So we can see all the way that it's done and decide how we want to move forward with this. And you can see that the created today actually adds 2 clauses in there. So this can be very useful, especially if you're running into issues where you've got super large queries. It may be possible to make those queries more efficient from a SQL Server perspective by reducing or rearranging the stuff in that field. And then it's important also to note, and this is just kind of a SQL Server knowledge, that the order of the wheres don't necessarily matter to the system analyzer, or I'm sorry, to the SQL Server as it's deciding how to find an execution path. But as I mentioned earlier, the index order does. And so if you put the index order in a way that eliminates more records up front, so let's say that I know that I have only a handful of records to the assigned to person, but I've got 500 for every call source. Having the assigned to first in there will make that query a lot faster. So, and of course, the rule of thumb is that any index is going to make it faster than no index. So don't be afraid to do what needs to be done from that perspective. You're not going to make it worse by adding an index, at least from a read perspective. You can make it worse from a write perspective. So, so it looks like we got about 2 minutes left. So, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, there's one that came through here from Alex. He didn't see. He said he's sorry I didn't see how we find actions taken by automation process. He's been trying to troubleshoot self-service password recess. The automation process is supposed to monitor for creation of a password reset form and run a one-step. That's his use case.
Yeah, so when you're actually trying to, the troubleshooting of the automation process from a one-step perspective can be done using the system analyzer, but when you're looking at it from a live perspective, you have to turn on the logging on the analyzer itself in the server manager tool, and then you'll be able to export or to have a file with that information in it, and you can see where it considers whether or not it needs to run against that, and it'll tell you if the guard condition wasn't met or if the abort condition was met and those types of things. So that's not necessarily part of the system analyzer, it's part of the logging product or the logging portion. So.
All right, well, we're at the top of the hour. Thanks, Tony. That was great. Just a reminder, we will be sending out the link to this shortly, probably in the next few days, so look for that. We appreciate everybody attending. Let's see, we did get a question come through here quick, Tony. I will send a link, never they're posted. If they're hosted and not on a version that allows access to the logs, they can ask support for that information.
Yep, that's correct. Thank you for pointing that out. That's a great point. And I'm happy to stay on for 15 minutes after this if anybody has any additional questions that they'd like answered.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was not a question, it was more of a comment from Patricia.
Great, I like comments. The more information that can be shared amongst us, the better off we all are, right?
Yep, thanks for that, Pat from Ashley. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for attending, everyone, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks again, Tony.
Thank you, and thank everybody for attending.